40 to 40 is a blog and podcast hybrid project looking back, living in the now, and pondering on the future as Raymond Nurse turns 40. Each blog or podcast episode will feature topics beginning with F, such as foundation, family, financials, frenemies, and much, much more.
Raymond, another podcast episode on your journey 40 to 40. How you feeling?
I am pretty good today, but also pretty damn tired. I have been burning the candle on all the ends and in the middle, and I think it's finally catching up with me. So I feel this entire weekend, I'm going to try to rest as much as possible. How are you?
I'm good. I feel like it's also a product of age, right? Can't run the street. You about to be 40 years old, sir. Sit down somewhere.
That's true too.
So what are your first five for today?
As I was preparing for today's episode, I had this memory of grad school when I had moved up to America. I had this class, the lecturer, she gave us this assignment. I don't know this lady from Adam. She don't know me from Adam. I handed in the first assignment to her. It was a timeline done on Photoshop. Pretty neat. Loved it. The feedback I got was, I don't know if you did this on your own or if you found it somewhere. Automatically being accused of plagiarism. I've never had this lady for any class before, so I've not submitted anything to her. She don't know me. I don't know her. Straight off the bat, she looks and she is determining, based on something else that has clearly nothing to do with me, she's determining what I am capable of producing. And I could have understood if it was a situation where I am 14 weeks into a 16-week semester and I just been straight up trash, filth, garbage, madness. And that is what I was submitting each and every time. But here I am, the first thing I'm submitting to this lady. Throughout this upcoming episode that we're about to talk about, you would see a few more moments where things like this happen and you really got to keep your head on because, people be trying you. That's my first fight for today.
Well, today's F word is fairness, and let's just go ahead and dive in so you can get you some rest. First up, black on black. Please explain what you mean in terms of fairness by black on black.
Black on black. Well, we would have been through quite a few episodes thus far and have touched on my upbringing. And I think one of the biggest eye-openers for me would have been coming to America, where my reference, my lived experience, and my perspective is very much from a place of black on black, where my teachers, the police system, judicial system, everything for me is based on a country that is a Black majority, even though it's still very much a white economic majority. The systems and the social structures that I would have existed within, those would have been very much ran by Black people, governed by Black people. And for better or for worse, when I look at someone who is, if I got into trouble, for instance, that person is looking at me not with any bias. Well, colorism does exist, but for the most part, they're looking at me as, hey, here is someone who did something wrong. And that is pretty much the extent to what the reaction would be if, say, for instance, there's a police official versus anybody else under the sun. And so I took that knowledge and that lived experience, and I moved up to America, where America is definitely not ran on a black on black structure at all.
You got dang right. You see, I'm trying not to curse.
Nah, you good. No, there's an episode that, trust me, I wouldn't be surprised if a curse word slipped from somebody, even me. Yeah, so I got here and a lot of conversations that I had and a lot of moments when I sit back and I think about them is really me looking at it all from the lens of, here I am speaking to a woman, speaking to an elder, speaking to a child, as I would in Barbados. But then there's the additional dynamic of, who the hell is this Black person that got the gall to speak to me in this manner? Like, who does he think he is? So there are things that I did not understand. And so I had to learn real fast during my time here in America about what would be what is it? Is it so if we got black on black, like how there's black on black crime and all of this jazz that's pushed in the media, is it black within white? I don't even know what it would be, but it's definitely not black on black. There would be this moment where fairness comes into play there because a lot of things that they happen here, unfortunately, the lens that someone within the system or within the structure of America is looking at everything is definitely not a fair lens at all. I had to learn real fast. I'm like, sir, you not in Barbados, you're not in the Caribbean, how you would just look at somebody and, just reason with them. That is not how they're receiving it. That is not how they're seeing it. It has definitely been a steep learning curve. But again, you got to assimilate and understand the nuances of the culture that you're living within. So yeah, black on black, where fairness is concerned, I wish that people would just see people and not see people from that point of view of it being this advantageous thing like, oh, I colorblind and they don't see colors. Like, come on now. Everybody sees color unless you legit don't see color. And even then, I think there are some technicalities within how color is
Yeah, we're
seen.
not purple and blue. They see
There
color.
you go. Yeah. For me, just this moment where a lot more can be done just to be fair across the society. And I've had some not nice experiences. And unfortunately, during the entire ordeal, I'm just sitting back and I'm watching and I'm like, oh wow, this is not in my hands at all. I can't do anything. I am just here, and whatever happens, that's determined by someone else. So I literally just have to sit back and watch the show, even though I am, I guess, a star in it. It's been interesting around these ends for sure.
Well, while we're talking about kind of society and culture, you mentioned reparations and George Floyd in your notes. What are your thoughts about reparations in America and about what happened to George Floyd?
In terms of the reparations, over time you would hear about 40 acres and a mule and all these different formats in terms of what reparations could really look like. And if something is done, it would be fair to one demographic and fair to another. How would it all be able to occur? The biggest thing for me with the whole approach to reparations is, firstly, there's the acknowledgement. Like, to be fair, you need a level of awareness, just knowing, hey, I've done wrong. How can I do better, or whatever the case may be? Even if you don't formally apologize, actions do speak louder than words. We get a lot of these veiled apologies now within society where it is the quote unquote right thing to do, versus you could see the people, they don't really mean it, and then they go back to just continue along with the behavior that they have. When reparations come up, I always look at it from two sides of the coin. So there's what I would say is the black side of the coin, and then I would say there's the white side of the coin. The white side of the coin, firstly, is a lot easier to deal with. You've done people wrong, acknowledge you've done people wrong, do better. Tying into the acknowledgement, when you look at redlining, when you look at displacement of African Americans across the country, there are these moments where Americans go off to fight a war, they come back. Some people, they get a blight and they get this opportunity to chase the American dream, while others do not. Even to this day, there was one of my friends, she is an attorney, and she does a lot of her work with farmers in the South. I learned so much about their situation where when I think it's like the P2P or the PCP, there's some kind of loan. They had these loans that were available to them during the same pandemic period. These loans were easier to access for white farmers versus black farmers. Eventually, white farmers had gotten a certain amount of money to keep their businesses propped up and to keep everything going. Then the white farmers, and I might not remember it fully, but I think the white farmers then not just try to hinder the access to the funds for the black farmers, but somewhere in there they try to sue them. And so in my mind, I'm like, yo, it is so unfair and it is so wild to think that this same thing that is benefiting you, your family, your livelihood, and everything else, this other person, no different to you, other than skin color, they gotta suffer because of it. I have the solution to reparations, but nah, not for real.
I was about to say, go ahead and lay it on us and
So
post it
no.
everywhere.
So where reparations are concerned, I looked at it from a point of view of how would you, well, firstly, I'm back to the white one more time. Sorry, white people, you'll be fine because society is structured for you to be fine. Where reparations are concerned, the toughest thing outside of getting policymakers to get behind this train, the toughest thing is to look at someone who is somewhat disenfranchised and impoverished as a white person and convincing that person, this poor white man, woman, or child, that, hey, regardless of how bad things are for you, it is only fair to look at this other group of people and to give what was promised to them during the end of slavery days and everything else. Because when slavery is ending, you are looking at slave owners and you're paying them and you're telling them, hey, we are sorry that we inconvenienced you by freeing your labor force, which was enslaved black people. When you look at somebody in 2024 that is a poor white person, and then you're like, hey, we got to do right by these black people, that body understandably could just be like, but how it is that you giving up money to somebody black for something that happened hundreds of years ago and they're here struggling now? That not making sense to me. Like, I got to get something too. It's very difficult to pinpoint a moment when you can go about rectifying it. But I had this kind of notion. In my head, I thought if we look at 2024 and we split it into generations, where there are these key moments that occur during the lifetime of Black Americans and Black migrants here, you would then end up with 2 or 3 different levels of reparations where, for an instance, like mine, I would say, okay, we're going to give reparations to persons who have been living in the American system for 21 years. Well, if 21 years are, and I wouldn't qualify. For me, it is I've not been under this American system of disenfranchisement, so there's nothing for me. But then there would be one of the times, I think I had a note, but one of the times it was bringing it up to the Civil Rights Act. If you are super old, like someone's granny, 60 plus, you would get a bigger chunk of this payout. If you were 21 up to like 60, you would get another chunk. And then if you were under 21 years living here like me, is ineligible because I haven't lived here long enough under some of the atrocities of some of these systems to benefit from the reparations argument. And I feel it would be fair because I would be somewhat on the same level as that poor white person, where they're not getting anything for the reparations. I not getting, even though I'm Black, I not getting anything for the reparations either. If your elder has passed on, that would go to the estate of family members that they would have been. And it was things like big chunks, subsidies for housing, 60,000, 100,000 for housing for like the older person. Free education. Listen, if you're Black in America and you're young, you got to get free education. Way too many times, those things were just not available. You miss out on generational wealth. The policy would help with the fairness of it all. And what's crazy to me? The thing that's crazy to me is I had a conversation with someone and is a white American lady. This is when I was working in Alabama. And in this conversation, we spoke about free education. This conversation went down the line of it is too expensive to provide a service like free education to everyone. And so then I'm like, why? How is it that a little small island like Barbados kind of figured something out? why is it that so many places in Europe kind of figure something out? So then the lady was like, America just can't afford it. And so we went back and forth, kind of having this discussion. So I told her, what about the Space Force? And what about a lot of the funds that allocated in the budget annually to space exploration, for instance? And she was like, oh yeah, I see what you mean. I'm like, yeah, what about the funds that, you put into defending against the aliens? She's like, yeah, that makes sense. And then at the end, she said, but no, you still got to pay for the education because I feel like we need to be able to defend ourselves against what we don't know is coming. So I'm like, wait. So you're telling me your fear of the unknown is way more worthy of funding than people on the ground right here, right now in your country, and it helps across the board. I've had quite a few of those conversations where a lot of times they come down to where's the money coming from to do that. It's amazing to me. And I'm like, yo, it's not fair. It really isn't fair that you can squander money into looking into the stars. And I love my space. I love space.
Okay, NASA.
Aliens are real. I am heavier in that camp, but we could do a lot more as a people for those on the ground. When George Floyd came around, that was when I really understood how unfair a lot of things are here. And I was having a lot of conversations, and depending on which side of the argument you are on, or discussion, or the thought process, however you want to put it, you would always end up with this notion of, and it's just little words, protests versus riots. A lot of those things. Again, I had this conversation once with another Caucasian person, well, with a Caucasian person, because another implies that I am one. So I had this conversation once with a Caucasian person. And during the conversation, she's referencing protests. And man, this conversation was wild. She went on to reference Martin Luther King Jr. She wanted to know why we can't do things like back in Martin Luther King Jr. days. He did everything peacefully. I looked at her and I said, okay, cool. Think about what you are requiring of these people who've been affected by this moment and just generally across the board. You are looking at someone who has been trying peacefully from Martin Luther King Jr. times to now, times before. You're looking at them and you're asking them to try to do something peacefully that they have been trying without any effect.
But also, Martin Luther King was not revered during the time in which he lived. He was hated. He was policed heavily. He was being investigated constantly by the FBI and monitored. Like, I love this sudden glorification or deitizing that has happened since his passing. It's interesting to me.
Yeah, and yeah, like you say.
And I don't mean that by the Black community. I mean that
yeah.
by others in society.
The society within which he would have been living, trying to have everyone to do better. And yeah, she was on and on about that. But then I look at her and I say, hey, I am not African American, but I can understand where somebody would want to burn shit to the ground if they try to do this thing peacefully and try to get you to do better. And you're not listening. The only thing that you're likely going to listen to here is something that affects the bottom line. And the reality is, what a lot of people don't realize with the civil rights era is when things started to impact the economy is when the government and the powers that be try to do better. There is no oppressed people. Actually, let me not say that. I would love someone to show me an example of people throughout history that have been oppressed, where the oppressor just woke up one day and it was like, oh man, I've had a change of heart. I've been doing you wrong for the last 3 generations. You know what? Let's do better. There's no moment in history where that happens. If there is one, and I'm speaking out of turn, that's my bad. I don't want to mislead anybody, but provide
Moses.
it to me.
I'm just kidding.
Just bring me your Moses and educate me, because nobody gets an advantage in life, lives it up, and just is like, oh, I've been unfair in these people. Let me do right by them. It doesn't happen. Let's be realistic. It's either by blood, tears, money. Something has to give Something has to hurt whatever system, whatever structure is in place. It has to hurt it in a point where then it's like, oh, yeah, boy, I gotta do better. They're tearing shit up for real, for real. Yeah, you need to be a lot fairer.
All right. Well, thank you for those thoughts. Let's move on to work and fairness in your work, fairness or unfairness, I guess I should say, in your work experience. You mentioned that you rarely see fairness in the world of business and architecture. You mentioned a 2-week work trip and docked pay, limited opportunities and a need to move, going out to job sites, and initially wanting to do some type of construction series, but then getting turned off to that. And then also the missing people from the Baltimore Bridge collapse. So, what are your thoughts in regards to fairness and your work experiences?
All right, so I've been on America for a bit, so I like to go back home to Barbados. A hard reset so people don't think like, oh my God, there's this perfect place or I'm biased. My first job in Barbados, I was working for an architect. It was lovely. I had a job, like I mentioned in the last episode, I had a job lined up day one. I was living the dream. We came across a few moments during work where I am very much on the side of being fair and being just and trying to do right by people. It was the end of the summer vacation that year that I worked with the company. I tried to do it by not revealing too much. Let me think on it all. Yes. So my employer, I think, yeah, that's how we're going to work it. So my employer had a baby that was under the toddler, one in between 1 and 2. But anyhow, they wanted to go to North America for this kid to see the grandparents. The employer organized a 2-week trip. It was a small company, 5, 6 of us or so, including the employer. While the employer was away, we did the best we could. The employer came back a day or two before payday. The employer says, hey, I personally feel like you as a unit, you didn't do sufficient while I was away, and I'm looking to dock your pay for the 2 weeks that I was gone. There's like 2, 3 days before the actual payday. And for those who might think, Barbados is this perfect place, Barbados is wild with many, many things. One of them, workers' rights. You could get away with a lot of nonsense in Barbados if you wanted to. The employer says, hey, we docking this pay. Payday is 2, 3 days from now. The end. Anybody got any issues with it? Everyone sat quiet, no worries. At the time, I was still living in my mom's house. So I knew if my pay was docked, I Gucci. I know that similar to the employer having a young kid, another guy in there, he had a young kid and he literally lives paycheck to paycheck. Then there was somebody else in there and they were renting. I said, hey, I don't think it's fair for you to come 2, 3 days before a payday to say that you're docking the salary by 2 weeks. I think you should be looking to let everyone know that's what you're going to do. This was the September pay pack. I think that's what you should be doing with October. And if you do it for October, at least these people have a month and a week to figure it out. They are aware that this thing is coming. I don't think it's fair for you to do that just so in that moment. Eventually, my thoughts on it, they didn't fall on deaf ears. The employer decided they wouldn't do it for the September. I think everyone went on to get the ducks in a row to figure out how October is going to look. In the end, it was never done. But for me, that was the moment when in that organization, I knew this is not reflective of me as a person, and this doesn't represent who I am. And I was supposed to be the employer's second in command. And so I knew right then and there that that was it for me. Moments like those would pop up quite a bit in architecture. When I moved up here, they popped up quite a bit more. And then when you add in the layers of color, and so here in America, I have seen a lot more advanced level, dastardly professional moments where I just think to myself, is no one seeing this? Is no one thinking this through? One of the examples would have been since working here in America, I remember I had a former co-worker and she was African American. She had a baby. I did not even know babies came in super preemie varieties. I just knew there's a preemie, there's a regular baby, the end. But apparently that's not always the case. This little baby was a super preemie and she was fighting for her life. I recall maybe about 3 or 4 months, my coworker would have been at home, sorry, not at home, in the hospital 24/7, trying to be there through this entire process of little baby fighting for her life. Finally, everything settled. Bless that child. She is a fighter and she's still alive today, thank God. But everything settled and we got to a point where she was able, and she was out to work all of that time. We got to a point where she was able to return to work. She came to work the beginning of February. Everybody is super happy, just stoked that the baby good. So she comes to work, meet the kid, people in that organization, they take photos with the baby, post the baby on Instagram and everything, Welcome, baby. Happy to have you part of the family and all of this jazz. To then fire this young lady at the end of February. For me, and again, that is a kind of turning point within an organization because you are an extremely unfair person and you're extremely disgusting to think that this moment, especially knowing what Black mothers go through in America, this moment is something that you can utilize with the feel-good factor and marketing and all of that jazz, great PR for the company, while you're getting rid of this person within a couple of weeks. And I am sure, I won't call the organization name, we don't rock like that. But I'm sure if you go on the organization's website, Instagram page today, that picture's still up there, welcome and you can't do that things to people. You got to do better. That's the truth. Across the board up here, I used to think it was not necessarily specific to architecture, but more predominant within architecture. But the reality is that's my wheelhouse. That's what I know. It just sounds like across the board is some kind of craziness.
Yeah, just a reflection of the larger sentiment of society, right? We're pretty individualistic and capitalistic and all the things that make people act with less integrity than it sounds like you were expecting in a lot of
Oh,
these
yeah.
work situations. So finish us out with just as you're on the way to 40, your thoughts on fairness. Are you hoping that things change in the spaces that you've navigated, or are you just focused on what you can control within yourself?
Yo, I am just focused on what I could control within myself because if I am coming around to 40 and I have been working, let's say studying and working, because yeah, academia in many ways even worse than practice. But if I've been working and studying now for the last 2 decades, I don't think anything changing. Keeping it 100, that sucks, but that really is the harsh reality. I have enough gray beard. Right? I have enough gray hair in my beard. I am blessed to be coming around to 40 and I've lived a real good life thus far. And I continue to live a good life because that's why I'm so damn tired. And as this call finished, I go into my bed and sleep. We just need to, if you see something, say something. I think that as bad as things are, we are all so busy just trying to live and to get by
Mm,
that sometimes we just clueless. Like it can literally be right there in front of your face and you're not seeing it. So if you have been on the receiving end of something not nice and some form of unfairness, if that's even a word, talk
it's a
about it.
word. It's a
It
word.
is?
Yes, unfairness is a word.
Oh, I just know unfair. I wasn't sure if unfairness is a word, but yeah, if you've
That's a good
received
point. I think it is a word.
pull a dictionary here now too. I'm curious.
Yeah, I think it's a word.
Yes, it is. It is. It
Yeah,
is.
I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm not
I'm like,
tripping.
yeah, no, I say, and I'm like, is it a word?
Yeah, I'm not tripping.
Just to be on the safe side. But no,
Just
if
say it with
you
confidence, even if it wasn't, you know?
just own it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you've been on the receiving end of some unfairness like that, yeah, if you've been on the receiving end of some unfairness, don't assume that people know. Assume that they know after you have told them. Keep your receipts. Tell them, but tell them in earnest and tell them from hopefully a proper place and in a safe space, and especially professionally, hopefully things get better. If you are on the delivering end of the unfairness, stop taking advantage of people. Stop being a little shit. Like for real. Like, why you doing it? And I'm looking forward to all right, done. Yeah, I done.
Okay. Well, that'll do it.
Gentle people, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. For me, I just want us to know that we don't need to put ourselves in the shoes of others to do the right thing and to think on whether something would feel good or not to another person. If someone says, hey, I'm not rocking with it, just trust that they're not rocking with it and just call that a day. Yeah, don't overthink it. Just do better. Blessings, families, and my humblest apologies. This website giving me licks. But the stuff up on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And I promise, once I get everything worked out, we're going to be up and running.